Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. When it comes to money, it's all about the numbers, obviously. But most financial decisions are not as simple as say 2 plus 2 is 4. A lot of times you have to factor in complicated things like compounding interest rates, your current debt burden, your income, your projected retirement age, or more. So once you factor in all of these things, a lot of times your head's left spinning or you're left with the feeling of, I don't really know if I'm making the right decision. Well, you know the saying, there's an app for that. Well, the good news is when it comes to money, there's probably a calculator for that. No matter what your question is when it comes to finance, there's probably a calculator that can help you out. Yes, there's probably an app for that too, but the app probably costs money, so I would still recommend going with these online calculators. When it comes to these financial calculators, they can actually be kind of fun to play with. So if you're a little bit nerdy, you probably have just as many hypothetical money questions as you do real money questions. But these financial calculators can kind of serve as a guide and help give you more information and thus make better, more informed decisions. So let's dive right into it. Let's take a look at some interesting financial calculators that can help you make better money moves. The first calculator is FIRE Calc, and if you've ever considered FIRE, Financial Independence Retire Early, you have to check out this calculator. What this calculator does is run simulations on your portfolio, 101 of them to be exact, to see its probability of success throughout your retirement. And after all, ensuring that you don't run out of money in retirement is one of the best things you can ever do for yourself.
Okay, now I'll admit that this calculator has a definite 90s vibe to it, but once you get past the appearance, it does have some really sophisticated features. So this is the homepage where you get started. Here is where you enter the amount that you plan on spending per year in retirement, your current portfolio savings, and the total number of years you plan on spending in retirement. So for this example, I'm going to assume that you would want to spend $70,000 in retirement every single year, that you currently have $600,000 saved up, and that you would like to spend 50 years in retirement. Remember, this is FIRE. You might be retiring early. Now here are where the tabs start to get interesting. Right next to the Start Here tab, we have Other Income and Spending.
And this tab is where you can enter expected Social Security payments or even pensions. In this case, I'm going to assume that we have a 30-year-old hoping to get Social Security at the age of 65, so 35 years from now, and we'll assume they get $1,500 a month. We'll also assume that they have no pensions. The next tab is Not Retired. This is where you can put in what year you plan on retiring. So I'll say that our person wants to retire in 20 years, so at the age of 50. So that would be the year 2041. And that they will be able to save $25,000 a year until that time. The next tab is spending models. This is where you can play with different types of spending. You have constant spending, so it's the same every single year. Bernicki's reality, so you are reducing your spending as you get older, or a percentage of the remaining portfolio, meaning that you would take less out in down years and more out in up years for the market. In this case, I'll assume that you're going with constant spending power. This next tab is where you can play with different type of investment portfolios. I'm going to keep it nice and simple, going with the total stock market index, and I'm going to say that you're investing 80% in stock equities. The next tab over is portfolio changes. This is where you can account for any lump sum withdrawals that you would plan on making in your retirement years. Say you wanted to buy a vacation home or buy a new car, you could account for it here. In this example, I'm not going to assume that there are any planned withdrawals from the portfolio. And this final tab, Investigate, is where you can add even more parameters to this experiment. You can change your asset allocation. You can change the year you retire. You can change what happens if you have different expense ratios. I'm going to add the parameter that I don't ever want the portfolio to dip below a net worth of $500,000. Finally, we hit calculate, and these are our results. There are 101 different lines on this graph, and it's not so important that you follow any single one of them. Each one is a different simulation. We do see with this portfolio that it has a high probability of success. But we also notice here that there's a 90% success rate with this portfolio, meaning that there's a 10% chance where it does not work out. But remember, I did set some additional parameters, like I didn't want the portfolio to ever fall below $500,000. So if it did fall below that, it's going to be deemed a failure. So get on this calculator if you're interested in FIRE, play around with your numbers and see what you get, because this one's actually really fun to play with. Now, FIRE Calc works best for those who are planning their early retirement off an investment-based approach. If you're planning it based on, say, real estate properties and the income they produce, well, it doesn't lend itself so readily, but it is a really useful tool if you are going that investment route. It can help guide you down the path to see if you are building a successful portfolio or to let you know if there's some areas that you need to adjust. On the flip side of FIRE Calc, we have a traditional retirement calculator, and this one, brought to you by Kiplinger, will help you determine what your retirement goal should be based on the information you provide and how much you would have to save each month in order to reach this goal. And yes, as an added bonus, it does factor in inflation.
Now, I like this calculator for retirement because it does allow you to add quite a few extra factors. So here we get to start off with putting in what your current income is. In this example, I'll say that our person makes $55,000 a year. They are not planning on retiring for an additional 30 years from now, and they plan on replacing 80% of their current income. Once they do hit Social Security age, we're going to say they assume they get $1,500 a month. Let's say they have no pension. Currently, we will say that they've saved up $300,000 and they are invested pretty aggressively, getting an 8% annual return. Now in section 4 here, you can also add in what they would expect to get for the sale of their home or the equity in their home if they were to draw on that. In this situation, I'm not going to assume that this person is planning on selling their home, but you do have that option to do so. And then in this final category, let's say that they expect to live for 30 years in retirement. During their retirement, they are going to be invested pretty aggressively, so 65% in stocks and equities. And finally, we're not going to assume there's any additional assets. So let's hit calculate, and here's what we get. This is saying that this portfolio is anticipated to be very successful. It's saying that in retirement, this person can expect to have $106,000 a year as annual income. Their nest egg goal was only about $1.4 million, but their savings actually grew to $3 million. So this person should be sitting nice and comfortable.
Next up, we have a compounding interest calculator, and I love a compounding interest calculator. I remember when I first discovered them when I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and I would play with them for way too long. I would put in different interest rates, different saving amounts per month, different time horizons for investments, all to see how it would affect the outcome. I don't know if I'm the only one who's done this. If you guys have done this, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm just curious if I'm an oddball or if this is just something everyone does. But nonetheless, a compounding interest calculator will always be my favorite financial calculator. And this one from investor.gov is actually pretty cool.
Now, it's important to note that there's a lot of different compounding interest calculators out there, but I really like this one because it has an added feature that most of them don't have. So in this situation, we are going to assume that a person starts out with $1,000 invested. They're able to save $500 a month. Let's say they're able to do that for 35 years. We're going to assume an 8% return rate, but here's the added feature. You can add an interest rate variance range, meaning that your investments could do better than 8% or they could do worse. So you're going to run multiple simulations. In this situation, I'm going to assume a 2% variance. So you could get anywhere from 6% all the way up to 10% per year. So let's find out. So the number here at the top is assuming our 8%. So if we get that 8% return rate, investing that $500 per month for 35 years, you would end with a portfolio of just over $1 million. But if you want to see that variance, that 6% return or that 10% return, you just look down at the graph and you can see that it's a pretty significant difference. But it is likely that we can anticipate different rates of return. And so factoring it in and making sure that you're covered no matter what, this is actually a pretty cool way to do things. And that's why I like this calculator.
Next up, we have a debt versus invest calculator, as in, should you pay off your debt or should you invest? And I know this is one of those big money questions that people have when it comes to your student loans, when it comes to credit cards or your auto loan. Should you focus on paying those off first, or should you focus on investing? Well, this calculator can help you answer that.
All you have to do is enter the amount of debt that you have. Here we'll assume that someone has $20,000. It will say it's student loan debt, so let's say that it's sitting at about an 8% interest rate. They have 360 months to pay it off, but also they could save, alternatively, $500 a month, and that could be invested into the stock market, earning an 8% return rate. So in this situation, we see that prioritizing investing is actually the better choice. You would come out ahead, you would make more money. So it's better to put some of your dollars towards investing and pay the minimum on your debts in this situation. But if you change these parameters, those kind of things can change. Let's say instead that you have $5,000 in credit card debt, and that one's going to be sitting at, say, 24%. Again, you can have those 360 months to pay it off because credit cards will allow you to take off as much as you want. You would invest $500 monthly, earning an 8%. And now we see that funneling money towards investments is actually costing you more money. You would save if you would just funnel all of the money you have towards paying off your debts, paying off that credit card debt. So throw the numbers you have into this calculator. It's actually a really interesting one to play with.
Next up, we have a cost of living calculator. Now, I'm pretty partial to a cost of living calculator because we move a lot, and we move a lot because of my husband's job. He's in the military, so every handful of years we do get relocated. And we actually just moved last month. We moved from Missouri to Rhode Island. And when we first got our orders to move to Rhode Island, my gut reaction was like, oh my gosh, it's so expensive to live on the East Coast. How are we ever going to save? So these calculators do come in handy, but I do have to say with the caveat of you can find a way to save money no matter where you live. You just have to control a few factors. So let's dive right in and look at this calculator.
When it comes to the cost of living calculator, you just have to enter the cities that you're comparing. So in my situation, we just moved from St. Louis, Missouri, and we moved to Newport, Rhode Island. Here we'll say that the annual income is $50,000 a year. And here are the results. A $50,000 income in St. Louis, Missouri is comparable to roughly $83,000 income in Newport, Rhode Island. We can scroll down and see the different categories that are more expensive. It is important to note that most of the increase in expenses does come from housing, which is how it's going to be in most major cities or in most high cost of living areas, as housing is the first thing to go up and the most significant factor in most people's budget. But each category does tend to be a little bit higher overall in Newport, Rhode Island. So if you're interested and you plan on doing a move, it's kind of fun to see how far your income will go in your next city. Type it in here and you can compare where you currently live to where you expect to be living and see how far your income will go.
Next up, we have a home affordability calculator. How much of a house you can afford is a really big financial decision, and it's definitely one you want to get right. Now, this calculator is actually going to use the kind of numbers that a bank would use. I don't think they are anything to be set in stone, but they are a good guidepost. I do think banks are a little bit lenient when it comes to their lending strategies, and what kind of home you can afford definitely depends on many factors, like what your debt obligations are and what your current income is. So this calculator is going to factor that in.
Now again, there are a lot of different home affordability calculators on the internet and none of them are perfect. The reason I want to throw this one up is because it allows you to factor in other factors in your life. And I think when calculators do that, it makes them a little bit more sophisticated and more likely to give a proper answer. So in this situation, let's assume a married couple is trying to buy a house. They have $100,000 a year income. Maybe they both make $50,000. There's no child support involved. Let's say they have an auto payment of $500 a month. They have credit card payments of say $100 a month. There's no association dues. Other monthly obligations, let's say between other bills that they have, that's going to come in at another $700 a month. Their current mortgage interest rate that they would qualify for is about 3%. We'll do a 30-year mortgage. Say they have $20,000 to put down on a house. Estimated property taxes, we'll assume about $4,000 a year. And homeowners insurance, we'll say that's another $350 a year. So we run our calculation and we find out that this couple can qualify for a home that is worth roughly $337,000. Now, it is important to note that this calculator kind of goes in line with what the banks do. They're going to approve you for a slightly higher amount than if you were to use, say, more conservative estimates, because they kind of base it off what your monthly obligations are or what your current debt is. So it is just one calculator for homeownership to keep in your toolbox. It is not perfect by any means.
Now, I did just recently do a video on home buying and what experts say you can afford based on their opinion. And I do think expert opinions can actually be really useful, but these calculators can also be useful spitting out a concrete number. They're not set in stone, but it does give you a guidepost from which to go forward. And then I also think when it comes to such big decisions as buying a home, don't just rely on a calculator, but it is one piece of information you can use in your overall research. And finally, we have the rent versus buy calculator. This is, should you rent a place or should you buy a place when it comes to your living situation? Renting isn't always a bad option. Buying a home isn't always a great option. It really depends on a myriad of factors. And this calculator is pretty comprehensive and it allows you to put in a lot of those factors that you should consider. It isn't always, can I afford the mortgage or can I afford the rent payment? There are a lot of pros and cons to both renting and to both buying a place. So let's dive right in to this calculator.
Now, a lot goes into the rent versus buy decision, and this calculator takes into account most of those factors. So in this situation, let's say that someone is looking at buying a home that's valued at roughly $400,000. They plan on staying in that place for 10 years. Let's say they can get a mortgage for about 2.9%. They're putting down a 20-year payment with a 30-year mortgage term. Let's say the homes are going to increase at about 3%, which is standard in line with inflation. Rent is going to increase at a similar percentage. Let's say that it's going up by 3% as well. Investments, let's say your investments can get a return of 8%. And inflation is chugging along at 2%. Property taxes are going to say a little higher in this area. Let's say they're about 1.5%. You fall into the 20% income tax range. Closing costs on the home, we'll keep that right in line. They're 4%. And then selling a home is a bit more expensive, coming in at 6%. Maintenance, homeowners insurance, we'll just keep all of those the same. Monthly utilities, let's say that they're about $250. There's no common fees. Any other costs associated with renting, that is going to be, let's say, just that monthly security deposit, and then your renter's insurance is usually pretty cheap. So in this situation, we can see that it would be better to rent, whether you're renting a home or an apartment, if you could rent a place for less than $1,757 per month. If it's more than that, you're better off buying. Now, of course, where you're planning on renting, where you're planning on buying, they all have different costs associated with them, and you can throw them into this calculator. This calculator is a really, really great tool if you're considering buying or if you're considering renting, moving to a new place. So I highly recommend it if you happen to be in this situation. This is a really great calculator.
Now remember, none of these calculators are perfect, but they do give you valuable information that you can then use to make better money decisions. They might tell you that you need to save more or you need to adjust your retirement date. They can help you confidently tackle your debt or more confidently buy a home. Now let me know down below if you plan on giving any of these calculators a try or if you've used them in the past, or better yet, if you have a calculator that I didn't list here but you like to use, let me know. Send a link or a name to it down below and I will absolutely give it a go, because you know I would love to try out a new money calculator. Well, that's gonna do it for me today, guys. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you are new here, please consider subscribing, or even better, if you know anyone at all who might get something out of these type of videos, please consider sharing, as it really does help the channel. Well, I will see you guys soon. I hope you have a good one. Bye.